Welcome to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska. And we are going to continue the broadcast of the publication by Prof.d-r Igor Janev, which we started in February this year, titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity Towards the Termination of an Illegal Treaty. This is part of our series on the Macedonian question. And as it pertains to this book, we are actually now covering chapter 5 and 5.2 in particular. Welcome once again to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia. 5.2. Necessity to overthrow the anti-national government of the SDSM and a referendum as a tool for that goal and preservation of the nation. After the conclusion of the protocol for the implementation of the so-called French proposal for the EU negotiations with Macedonia, with a backing of international community, the international community being the USA and the EU, against the will of the Macedonian people, raising dissatisfaction and disapproval, have united all the Macedonian political opposition parties against the puppet government, which apparently conducted external policies and agendas aimed at imposing and forcing assimilation of the Macedonian people into Bulgarian, assimilating them into being Bulgarian. The necessity to overthrow the anti-national puppet government of the SDSM became a matter of national survival. For leaders of the opposition parties, became blatantly clear that without the popular endorsement of such fundamental constitutional changes by the people's vote, that is the referendum, Parliament could not alone enact any law or legislation or any constitutional revisions demanded by the European Union, the Bulgarians, or even an entire international community. In that view, Prof.d-r requested that popular referendum be organized to check whether people support and endorse the French proposal, and even a treaty of friendship with Bulgaria from 2017 as a ground and pillar for any proposed changes, and hence the EU conditions for membership. After the strong objections to an idea to hold a referendum by the governing SDSM party, the opposition party, the major opposition party, Prof.d-r responded with the following quotation: if SDSM believes that the people are with them, it should not be afraid and support the referendum initiative. The leader of Prof. Mickovski steadfastly defended his ground idea that the referendum on Bulgarian demands must be conducted. Quotation: regarding the debate in the public, there is a strange situation, and that is that the opponents of the referendum declaration of the people are the government and those installations of the government in opposition. It is a strange situation that unites those installations of the government in opposition and between the Macedonian people and the government itself. And all the rest, the vast majority of citizens, regardless of their ethnicity, are in favor of holding a referendum, end of quote. According to Daily Republica, that's a newspaper, Christian Mickovski indicated that for the idea of a referendum, he received vast support from the Central Committee of his party and that in the forthcoming period, quotation, the consultations with the experts and the public will follow, end of quotation. In our view, says Professor Dr. Igor Janev, the author of this publication that I'm sharing with you with his permission, expressed permission, the initiative for popular referendum or plebiscite was generally sincere, but the leadership of VMRO didn't consider at that time all the variables related to the actual turnout probability for the validity of plebiscite with respect to high referendum census percentage constitutionally needed in this process. Constitutionally prescribed level of 50% census necessary for its validity was in fact unreachable. In the absence of the prescribed required 50% census for the turnout, the results of the referendum would not be valid, and as a result could become self-defeating. The result of insufficient turnout in the referendum would only serve as proof that by boycotting or abstinence, people in fact were not against the assimilation or Bulgarization. Bulgarization is in quotations. At this point, we may derive an opinion that, bearing in mind that 50% turnout represent the actual participation of over 912,000 people, to be valid, an idea and decision of VMRO to go with the plebiscite initiative was a risky one and possibly disastrous. Having in mind that on the previous referendum held in 2018, only 36.7% was the turnout, insufficient for it to be valid, and that presently the Albanian population will boycott the current initiative as they support the Bulgarian Treaty of Friendship along with their demands. An outcome of the future plebiscite would not be satisfactory as it will fail, says the professor. Despite of our predictions and predictions of other analysts indicating extreme level of risk to fail, leadership of the VMRO did not grasp the logic and the steadfastly continued with this initiative. In the following period, VMRO, with its experts in secret or behind the public, without the public knowledge, were engaged on an issue how to formulate the question for the referendum's vote. Apparently, VMRO-d-r, with support of the other Macedonian opposition parties, took stand that any referendum on the identity matter could serve for overthrowing the government and initiating conditions for the general or early or extraordinary elections. In fact, from the present perspective, it seems that the overthrowing the government was the main goal for initiating the referendum. After a couple of weeks from the moment of launching the idea, the leadership of the Macedonian opposition, not only the VMRO one, but other political parties as well, such as the party of the leftists, or known as Levica, couldn't just admit that idea for plebiscite was likely to be disastrous. Even from the beginning, it was sufficiently clear, due to the statistical variables indicating relatively low turnout of Macedonians, particularly under the current government and the organization of the SDSM and the Albanian party DUI, having at their disposal all of the tools of the propaganda and pressure. In the process of constructing the proper question for the referendum, VMRO and their experts correctly concluded that the major obstacle for preservation of the national identity was the Treaty of Friendship between Macedonia and Bulgaria, concluded in 2017. In the report by Republika, we found that VMRO's statement, quotation, VMRO-d-r is starting a procedure for a mandatory referendum with the aim of cancelling the agreement, with Bulgaria, signed by SDSM, which is the root of all negotiations, end of quote. On the other hand, the European Union, and particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia, in quotation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia, were actively sabotaging the referendum as they were against any obstacles to the Bulgarian conditions and the EU accession negotiations. The obstacle, this word is in quotations, such an initiative for a referendum, crucial questions with respect to Macedonian identity needed to be undermined. It was reported that the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Macedonia, B. Osmani, we've mentioned him before, he's Albanian, and declared as such in the government of Macedonia, interfered on matters regarding the decision on the initiative of the referendum at his meeting with the Portuguese Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he stated, we quote, "We put a lot of effort during our presidency to put together a proposal that we wanted to be accepted. What makes the French proposal better? In politics, the goal is not to achieve everything, but what is possible. If you look over the horizon and not concentrate only on current events. That is why I give credit to the Macedonian leadership for overcoming the difficulties and moving the process forward. A very important step forward has been made. We believe that the agreement that has been reached is an agreement that follows the beginning of the screening process, which is quite intensive and technically has two phases. The first is an explanatory screening, and the EC explains the different phases, that is the aspects of the legislation. Then follows the bilateral screening when the gaps in the legislative framework of Macedonia are determined. Says Gomez Cravino, adding that the second intergovernmental conference will be held as soon as the screening is finished and as soon as the constitutional amendments are completed, assessing that all countries have difficult moments during the negotiations. But in the case of Macedonia, he sees no reason that there will be bilateral blockades. In addition, SDSM and DUI from the very beginning took clear and very loud positions against the idea for referendum, indicating that they will do all and anything in their power to obstruct and undermine this idea, and in fact, not to allow people to decide on that matter at all. In the Macedonian media's reports, we found on one side strong objections to the referendum initiative by Dimitar Kochevsky, and the other side, sharp criticism by Vermero. Quotation, Kovachevsky is ignoring the people by running away from the referendum and does nothing about the energy crisis, only raises prices, end of quote. And more, quote, it is appalling that Kovachevsky persistently lies to the people that the language and identity are protected with the negotiating framework, and it actually gives Bulgaria the opportunity, if the Commission for Historical Issues does not agree on a specific issue, to block us. That is, to veto our European Union path until the Bulgarian ultimatum is fulfilled. What does that mean? This means that the attitudes regarding history must be equated with the Bulgarian view, and we see that it denies the language and the nation, so we have a block about which nothing is written in the frame, but which would happen if the constitution was changed and started with negotiation on the Bulgarian terms. And all this will result in complete Bulgarization, says the party. Kovachevsky knew all that, but he is consciously pushing Bulgarization just to stay in power for one more day. And this is exactly why a referendum is needed, which will prevent his betrayal directly, this betrayal directed by Kovachevsky and Pendarovsky. Kovachevsky being the outgoing prime minister, and Pendarovsky the outgoing president as of this day, being the 16th of April, 2024. And that has been part 1 of chapter 5.2. contained in the scholarly paper by Prof.d-r Igor Janev, an eminent international law expert and author of many books on international law. And it's titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity Towards the Termination of an Illegal Treaty. Second part. In September 2022, finally, VMRO-d-r leader Christian Mickovski submitted an initiative for the referendum to the state election, to the State Election Commission, or SEC. The daily newspaper Republika reported that, and we quote, Mickovski expects 100 signatures to be collected today in the regional offices of the SEC so that it can be delivered to the parliament after the national holiday. He, as he said, will be among the first signatories in the regional office of the SEC in the suburb of Karposh, as well as MPs from VMRO-d-r and the coalition. End of quote. A question for the referendum delivered to the State Election Commission was formulated as follows, quote, are you in favor of terminating the validity of the law on ratification of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria, published in the Official Gazette of the Republic of Macedonia, number 12/2018 of the 18th of January 2018. End of quote. With respect to this formulation of the question that was shaped and constructed by VMRO's team, Mickovski gave some general explanatory remark addressed to the citizens of Macedonia, saying that, quote, if the referendum takes place, end of quote, then, quote again, the citizens will have the opportunity to say in favor for, and thus this agreement with Bulgaria ceases to be valid, or say be against that, so this agreement with the Republic of Bulgaria remains valid, end of quote. Essentially, what Mickovski wanted to say in that termination of the law on ratification of the treaty would be a first step toward the nullification of the treaty. As we may notice here, and that is that given the interpretation by Mickovski that it was entirely accurate, was not entirely accurate, since in order to cease to be a valid act, a treaty needs to be terminated. A referendum per se obviously could not automatically nullify a treaty. In addition, the formulated question for a referendum was constructed in an unusual and odd manner, as termination of the law on ratification of the treaty, and not the treaty as such, through a diplomatic note for termination. Indeed, it appears that such nullification of the treaty is an option taking into consideration judicial precedent provided by the Macedonian Constitutional Court in the case of nullification of OCTA agreement with Greece, 2002, where the court, in absence of jurisdiction with respect to international treaties, actually nullified the law on ratification of that treaty and thus indirectly suspended or nullified a treaty per se. Nevertheless, this particular methodology of domestic nullification of a treaty appears to be very odd, since at the end of the story, with judicial nullification of the treaty, The Macedonian government still has to inform the other contracting party, that is Bulgaria, that the treaty was or has been nullified and not in force. This statement, information sent in the form of a diplomatic note to Bulgaria, is legally equivalent to the direct statement declaration or a diplomatic note for termination provided by Article 13 of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria. In Article 13, paragraph 3 of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria, it was provided how to terminate contracting obligations and rights. Quotation: each contracting party may terminate the treaty by giving written notice to the other contracting party. The treaty will cease to be in force 1 year after the date of receipt of this notice. Moving on to the next page, page 220. Therefore, in our view, it was, just one moment, please. Forgot to mention that it was end of quote. So I might read that again, actually. So here we have in Article 13, paragraph 3 of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria, there was provision on how to terminate the contracting obligations and rights. And we quote, each contracting party may terminate the treaty by giving written notice to the other contracting party. The treaty will cease to be in force 1 year after the date of receipt of this notice. End of quote. Therefore, in our view, it was entirely unnecessary for d-r to make the choice or the decision for referendum question that could potentially reopen the theoretical questions or potential dilemmas with respect to the relation between international law and domestic law. Instead, in my opinion, says Professor Igor Janev, a question that needed to be put before the citizens should have been placed in the following clear and direct form of, are you in favor of terminating the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria, published in the official Gazette number 12/2018 of the 18th of January 2018? Question mark. As I have pointed out in my public remarks, says Professor Igor Janev, the Macedonians already made a binding decision on the referendum held in 1991 for an independent and sovereign Republic of Macedonia, and therefore a new referendum was not necessary for that same matter again. Additional arguments for direct and clear approach with respect to the question for plebiscite I presented in another article published in the daily Nova Macedonia under the title, International Agreements Creates Legal Obligations, both for the fulfillment and for their termination, end of quote. As I discovered later, says Professor Igor Janev, the main motivation for d-r with respect to the initiative for a referendum was in fact to advance a process leading toward the early and/or extraordinary elections. Christian Mickoski, among other declarations or announcements, gave the following statement, quote, the fact that we are starting a procedure for calling a mandatory referendum on the BAD, B-A-D, agreement with Bulgaria does not mean that we are giving up the request for early elections. On the contrary, it is an excellent opportunity to organize elections with the referendum at one cost. End of quote. As I predicted, says Professor Igor Janev, as I predicted in my analysis regarding the destiny of the plebiscite, the president of the Macedonian parliament, Jaferi, from the DUI, that is the ultra-nationalist Albanian party in Macedonia, have rejected and dismissed the initiative for referendum on legal grounds. Legal grounds, words are in quotation. He offered an odd quasi-legal argument that the initiative was against the Constitution, apparently unaware of the above-mentioned Constitutional Court precedent, and thus blocked an initiative with the following, and in quotation, explanation. Start of quotation. The citizens' initiative is not a matter for which a referendum could be organized nationwide. The international treaties ratified in accordance with the Constitution are part of the national legal order and cannot be changed by law. End of quote. In addition, Jafferi revoked that initiative to hold a referendum on a treaty would allegedly be, quote, a breach of the Article 118 of the Constitution of the Republic of North Macedonia. End of quote. Just a reminder that this or Talat Jafferi is of Albanian background. He's not of Macedonian background, ethnically or otherwise, and he certainly proclaims himself as an Albanian. However, he lives in Macedonia and he happens to be in the echelons of power, something one reasonable person would question. How come? What happened there? That's another story. The apparently incompetent interpretation given by the president of the parliament, that's that Talat Jafferi, revoking Article 118 of the Constitution was or is apparently a wrongful one. It is provided in Article 118 of the Constitution that, quotation, the international agreements ratified in accordance with the Constitution are part of the international legal order. I beg your pardon. They are part of the internal legal order and cannot be changed by law. End of quote. However, after the already mentioned Octa case, it appears that the judicial precedent covering nullification of the Octa agreement, that is the law of ratification that is in domestic jurisdiction, could apply here as well in the case of the treaty with Bulgaria. Therefore, the Macedonian political opposition rightfully objected, that is the VMRO-DPMNE party, rightfully objected to the dubious and biased, in quotes, legal interpretation, end of quote, of the matter. And they also pointed out to the limited powers of a speaker of the parliament, that's the Jafferi man, of the Constitution. It appears that despite the stipulation that treaties, quote, are part of the internal legal order, end of quote, they still could be subject of termination or nullification, particularly if such act conflicts with the norm or of jus cogens or and are not implementable in practice. So here we end today's part of chapter 5.2. We shall continue with the final part of chapter 2, part 5, very shortly, so please stay tuned. We are endeavoring to keep the segments shorter so that you may follow them, because as you know, these are legal, this is a legal document. It relates to international law. It relates to the injustice that has been done to the Macedonian people and the Macedonian country or state as a whole as a result of certain decisions being made in the United Nations and Greece and Bulgaria. So here, with this paper, this scholarly publication, which has been researched thoroughly and with the prior knowledge and expertise, is giving us the facts of the matter. What we are interested in focus with Silvana Pavlovska is facts, and that's what we are able to present to you, thanks to Prof.d-r Igor Janev, I should say. So stay tuned, and I will see you very shortly. You've been listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia. Talk to you shortly.